In the dusty streets of Cactus Ridge, an elderly man sits quietly on his wooden porch. His weathered hands shake as he rocks in his chair. The local troublemakers make fun of him every day. They don't know that those trembling hands once belonged to the most feared shooter in the Arizona territory. They're about to learn that some legends never die. They just get older. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. If this story touches your heart, make sure you subscribe because tomorrow, I have something extra special saved for you. The blazing Arizona sun beat down on Cactus Ridge, a small town nestled between tall red cliffs and endless stretches of desert brush. Every morning, like clockwork, Samuel Creek would settle into his creaking rocking chair on the front porch of his simple home. His silver hair shined in the morning light, and his worn boots showed all the miles they had traveled. To people passing by, he was just another old-timer living out his final years, watching the world go by through tired eyes. Most folks in town knew him as the quiet man who would walk into Betty Johnson's saloon every Thursday for a bowl of soup and a glass of water. He never drank whiskey anymore, though nobody knew why. The children would sometimes stop by his porch for the hard candy he kept in his pocket. He would tell them stories about the desert, which plants could heal, which could hurt, and how to read the weather in the clouds. Young Bobby Parker, a bright-eyed 12-year-old with a love for the Old West, was especially fond of the elderly man. He would sit cross-legged on the porch steps, listening to Samuel's soft-spoken tales about the land. What Bobby didn't know, what nobody in town knew, was that the gentleness in Samuel's voice hid decades of stories that would make even the bravest men shake with fear. The peace of Cactus Ridge was broken the day Cole the Viper Henderson and his gang rode into town. They were the kind of men who mistook kindness for weakness, the sort who would rather steal than earn. Cole, with his silver-studded gun belt and expensive black hat, carried himself like he owned every inch of ground he walked on. His right-hand man, Jake Stone, was a powder keg of anger with tobacco-stained teeth and quick hands. The youngest of their group, Danny Williams, was barely into his 20s, trying to prove himself with every breath he took. It didn't take long for them to notice the old man on the porch. To them, he was the perfect target. Someone who couldn't fight back, someone who had lived long enough to gather a few valuable things worth taking. They didn't know about the carefully oiled Colt .45 hidden beneath the blanket across his lap, or the fact that his trembling hands became steady the moment he wrapped them around a gun grip. The first confrontation came on a Tuesday morning. Cole and his boys had spent the night drinking in Betty's saloon, and their mood was sour from losing at cards. They stopped in front of Samuel's porch, the dust from their boots settling on his freshly swept boards. "Well, look what we have here," Cole drawled, spitting tobacco juice near Samuel's feet. "The town's official sidewalk warmer. Must be real important work you're doing there, old-timer." Samuel's eyes, still sharp despite his years, took in every detail. The way Cole's gun hung slightly low on his right hip, how Jake's left boot had a loose spur, and how young Danny's trigger finger twitched nervously. He said nothing, just kept rocking. "Are you deaf as well as old?" Jake stepped closer, his spurs jingling harshly. "The boss is talking to you." "I hear just fine," Samuel replied softly, his voice carrying the gentle rasp of age. "And I see just fine, too. I see 3 men who ought to be moving along." Danny laughed, a harsh sound, trying to match his companion's cruelty. "Or what, Grandpa? You'll bore us to death with stories about the good old days?" Sheriff Robert Palmer watched the scene unfold from across the street, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. He knew Samuel's history, one of the few who did, and he saw the almost invisible change in the old man's posture. It was subtle, the way a rattlesnake's warning is subtle to those who don't know what to look for. Betty Johnson stepped out of her saloon, wiping her hands on her apron. She had known Samuel for years and had seen the old newspaper clippings he kept folded in his Bible. She knew what those trembling hands had done in their prime. "Boys," she called out, "your breakfast is getting cold." Cole turned, annoyance flickering across his face. "We'll be there when we're good and ready, woman." But he stepped back from the porch anyway, making a show of adjusting his gun belt. "We'll continue this conversation later, old man. Maybe see what kinds of treasures you've got tucked away in that little house of yours." As they swaggered away, young Bobby Parker emerged from behind a water barrel where he had been watching. Mr. Creek? He whispered, climbing onto the porch. Why did you let them talk to you like that? Samuel's eyes, the color of faded denim, crinkled at the corners as he smiled. Bobby, my boy, there's something you need to learn about this world. Sometimes the smartest thing a man can do is let others think they're stronger than him. But remember this, it's not about who makes the most noise. It's about who knows when to make their move. He reached into his pocket for a piece of candy, but his hand brushed against something else. An old tin star, its silver surface dulled with age. The words Arizona Rangers were still barely visible beneath the tarnish. He let it lie there, a reminder of days long past, days that might not stay in the past much longer. The following days in Cactus Ridge carried a weight of anticipation, like the heavy air before a storm. Cole Henderson and his gang had made themselves at home in Betty's saloon, turning the once peaceful establishment into their personal kingdom. They would push tables over for fun, harass the customers, and Betty could only watch as her regular customers started staying away. Even the traveling salesmen who usually brought news and goods from other towns had begun to skip Cactus Ridge, sensing the dangerous shift in the town's atmosphere. Sheriff Palmer had tried to maintain order, but with only 2 deputies and a town council unwilling to risk confrontation, his options were limited. He had seen towns fall this way before. Good people staying quiet, bad men getting bolder, until the very soul of the place withered away like a desert flower in drought. It was Thursday, and despite the growing tension in town, Samuel Creek maintained his routine. He made his way down the dusty street toward the saloon, his walk slow but purposeful. The morning sun cast long shadows behind him, and those who knew him well might have noticed he wasn't using his cane today. As he walked, he passed the general store where old Bill Thompson was sweeping his porch, pretending not to see the 3 horses tied outside Betty's place. "Morning, Samuel," Bill called out, his voice carrying a note of warning. "Might want to take your meal home today. Heard Betty's place is a bit crowded." Samuel tipped his hat but kept walking. A group of children playing marbles in the dirt stopped their game to watch him pass, their young faces showing concern. Bobby Parker broke away from the group, running to catch up with the old man. "Mr. Creek," Bobby whispered urgently, "Cole's been talking about you all morning. I heard him in the store. He said he's going to teach you some manners today." Samuel placed a weathered hand on Bobby's shoulder. "Thank you, son. Now run along home. This isn't going to be a place for children today." "Well, if it ain't the town's oldest resident," Cole called out as Samuel pushed through the saloon doors. The gang leader was sprawled in a chair, boots up on a table, while Jake and Danny played cards nearby. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat between them, despite the early hour. "Come to grace us with more of your silence, old man?" Betty moved to serve Samuel his usual soup, but Cole's arm shot out, blocking her path. "Hold on there, Betty. Our friend here needs to learn some manners first. In my experience, respect is something you earn." The saloon had fallen silent except for the nervous shuffling of feet and the distant ticking of the clock above the bar. 2 ranch hands sat nervously in the corner while young Bobby Parker, despite Samuel's warning, peeked through the window from outside. Sheriff Palmer was nowhere to be seen. He had ridden out early to handle a dispute at the Peterson Ranch, though some suspected he had chosen today for that task on purpose. "The only thing I'm here to earn," Samuel said softly, "is my Thursday soup." Danny Williams laughed, showing his youth. "Maybe you should earn it on your knees, Grandpa. Beg for it, nice and proper." "Watch your mouth, Tim," Betty snapped, her patience finally breaking. "That man's been coming here longer than you've been alive." Cole stood, shoving his chair back. "Seems like everyone in this town needs a lesson in respect. Betty, why don't you step outside? This is men's business now." "It's all right, Betty," Samuel interrupted, his voice steady. He moved to the center of the room, and something in his stance made Cole's smile falter slightly. "You know, boys, my father taught me something important when I was young. He said there are 2 types of men in this world, those who command respect through fear, and those who earn it through their actions." "And which type are you?" Jake sneered, standing up from his card game, tobacco juice staining his beard. "I was both at different times," Samuel replied. His hands hung loose at his sides, no trace of their usual tremor. But these days, I prefer to be neither. I just want my soup. Cole stood slowly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. You know what I think? I think you're full of tall tales and hot air. Men who are something don't end up as nothing, old-timer. Some men choose to become nothing, Samuel replied. It's easier than living with being something. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning that the gang couldn't quite grasp. Betty could, though. She had seen the newspaper clippings, read the stories about the legendary Hawkeye Creek, the ranger whose shots never missed, whose quick draw had cleaned up 3 territories. The man who one day simply disappeared, leaving his badge and his legend behind. She remembered the day he had first walked into her saloon 5 years ago, asking only for a quiet corner and a bowl of soup. She had recognized him then, but honored his silent request for anonymity. Choice or not, Cole said, his hand resting on his gun, you're still nothing now, and nothing men eat when we say they can eat. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next few moments seemed to stretch like molasses. Cole's hand tightened on his gun grip. Jake moved to flank Samuel's left while Danny, eager to prove himself, actually drew his pistol. Outside, Bobby Parker held his breath, his knuckles white where he gripped the windowsill. Danny, Samuel said to the young man, not even turning to look at him, if you don't put that gun away, you'll never get another chance to draw one. There was something in his voice, not a threat, but a certainty that made Danny's hand shake. The young man looked to Cole for guidance, but Cole was focused on Samuel's eyes, seeing something there that made him uneasy. It was like looking into the eyes of a wolf that had been pretending to be a sheep, not out of fear, but out of choice. Are you threatening one of my boys, old man? Cole's voice had lost some of its mockery, replaced by something harder. No threats, Samuel replied. Just experience talking. The kind that comes from seeing too many young men die because they drew iron when they should have drawn wisdom. Betty moved behind the bar, her hand sliding beneath the counter where she kept a scattergun. She had seen enough bar fights to know when one was brewing, but this felt different. The tension wasn't hot and angry, it was cold, calculated, like the space between lightning and thunder. Experience? Cole laughed, but it sounded forced. What experience could a broken-down old man have that's worth anything? Samuel's right hand moved slightly, and for the first time, Cole noticed the calluses there. Not the kind you get from farming or ranching, but the kind that come from years of handling a gun. They were the same calluses Cole saw in his own hands every morning. Boys, Samuel said quietly, I'm going to sit down now. Betty's going to bring me my soup, and you're going to let her. Because deep down, Cole's been asking questions, sending telegrams. By morning, he'll know exactly who you are. Who you were, Cole corrected. Let him ask, Samuel replied, his voice carrying the weight of years. The answers won't change what's coming. Outside, the town was unusually quiet. Cole and his men had retreated to their rooms above the saloon, and even the usual evening card games had been suspended. Betty Johnson had closed early, something she hadn't done in 15 years of running the establishment. Young Bobby Parker sat on his front porch with his father, watching Samuel's house from across the street. Pa, he asked, is it true what they're saying about Mr. Creek being some kind of famous lawman? John Parker looked down at his son, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes, Bobby, the most dangerous men are the ones who work hardest to appear harmless. Your mother and I weren't here when the Rangers were cleaning up the territories, but my pa used to tell stories about a man they called Hawkeye. Said he could shoot a playing card edge on at 50 paces. At that moment, Cole Henderson was in his room, reading a telegram by lamplight. His face grew darker with each line. Jake Stone paced nervously while Danny Williams sat quietly in the corner, still shaken from the afternoon's events. Well? Jake asked, pausing his pacing. What do your friends say? Cole crumpled the telegram, his knuckles white. They say we've been playing with fire. That old man, he's not just some has-been lawman. He's Hawkeye Creek, the one who took down the Clayton gang single-handed. The one who cleaned out the Copper Canyon bandits. The one who... He paused, swallowing hard. The one who killed my older brother 15 years ago in a shootout in Tombstone. Danny's head snapped up. Your brother? You never said anything about... Because I didn't know it was him. Cole's fist slammed into the table. Jack rode with the Clayton gang. I was just a kid when it happened. All these years I thought it was just some nameless ranger who killed him. But it was him, Creek. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The afternoon's humiliation took on a new meaning. It wasn't just an old man standing up to them. It was the legend himself. The man whose name mothers used to scare their children straight, whose reputation had once cleared towns faster than a prairie fire. So what do we do? Danny asked, his young voice betraying his fear. Cole's face hardened into something ugly. We do what we came here to do, but now it's personal. Back at Samuel's house, Sheriff Palmer shifted uncomfortably. They'll come for you. You know that, right? They would have anyway, Samuel said, sliding the cleaned revolver into its holster. Men like that always push until something pushes back. The only difference is now they'll come at night instead of during the day. They'll try to burn me out, most likely. Palmer's hand tightened on his hat. I can deputize some men, set up a watch. No. Samuel's voice was firm. I've spent 5 years in this town trying not to be what I was. If this has to end the old way, I won't have anyone else's blood on my hands. Just make sure the fire wagon is ready and keep people in their homes tonight. As Palmer left, Samuel walked to an old trunk in the corner. Inside, beneath folded blankets and memories he had tried to forget, lay a gun belt he had hoped never to wear again. The leather was still supple, well-oiled despite the years. The twin Colts in their holsters seemed to whisper to him of days past, of quick draws and quicker decisions, of lives taken and lives saved. Betty Johnson appeared at his door just then, carrying a covered dish. Brought you some supper, she said, though they both knew it was an excuse. Heard Cole sent some telegrams. Thought you might want some company while you wait. Samuel smiled, genuinely touched by her concern. You should be home tonight, Betty. Tonight's not going to be fit company for a lady. I've been serving whiskey to cowboys for 20 years, she replied, setting the dish down. I stopped being a lady a long time ago. She paused, looking at the gun belt in his hands. Is it true what they say about you never missing? Everyone misses sometimes, Samuel said softly. The trick is making sure it's not your last shot. He looked up at her, his eyes carrying a sadness that belied his calm demeanor. Go home, Betty. Lock your doors. Whatever happens tonight, Cactus Ridge is going to be different come morning. As Betty reluctantly left, Samuel began his preparations. He moved his rocking chair away from the window, placed water buckets strategically around the house, and loaded extra cartridges. The sun had set completely now, and the first stars were appearing in the desert sky. In the growing darkness, he could hear the town settling in for what everyone knew would be a long night. Young Bobby Parker, ordered inside by his parents, watched from his window as the last light faded from Samuel's house. The old man's porch, usually occupied by his familiar rocking figure, stood empty, a silent sentry awaiting the storm that everyone could feel approaching. Midnight crept over Cactus Ridge like a thick blanket, bringing with it an unnatural stillness. The usual sounds of the desert night, coyotes calling, night birds hunting, the wind whistling through the canyon, seemed muted, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The moon hung full and bright, casting sharp shadows across the empty streets. In his darkened house, Samuel Creek sat motionless in a straight-backed chair positioned away from any windows. His weathered hands rested on the worn grips of his twin Colts, fingers curved naturally around the familiar steel. The tremor that had marked those hands for 5 years was gone now, replaced by the rock-steady grip that had made him a legend. From his vantage point, he could see the approaches to his home through carefully arranged mirrors, an old trick he had learned during his ranger days. The setup had taken hours to perfect when he had first moved in, though he had prayed he would never need to use it. Now those mirrors showed him everything. The empty street, the shadows between buildings, even the roof of the general store where someone might try to set up a long shot. Across town, in the back room of the saloon, Cole Henderson was working himself up to a cold rage. The telegram that had revealed Samuel's identity lay crumpled on the floor, but its words burned in his mind. He had spent the last hour telling Jake and Danny stories about his brother Jack, stories he had kept buried for 15 years. Jack wasn't just some common outlaw, Cole said, his voice thick with whiskey and memory. He had plans. The Clayton gang was just a stepping stone. He was going to build something bigger, something lasting. Then Creek came along, and with 6 shots, he destroyed everything. Jake, normally quick to violence, showed unusual hesitation. Maybe we should ride out, boss. Man with that kind of reputation. That reputation is 15 years old, Cole snapped. Look at him now, he's an old man playing at being harmless. All that legend, and he ends up hiding in a dusty little town pretending to be nothing. That's not the kind of man we need to fear. Danny Williams sat in the corner, cleaning his gun with shaking hands. The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on him like a physical thing. What's the plan? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Cole's smile was cold in the lamplight. Simple. You and Jake take the back. I'll come in the front. We'll smoke him out, literally. Man his age, he'll either burn or run. Either way, by sunrise, people will know that legends can die just like anyone else. Sheriff Palmer stood in his office, staring out the window at the silent town. His deputy, young Sam Tucker, waited nervously by the door. Shouldn't we do something? Tucker asked. We could gather some men, surround the area. And do what? Palmer interrupted. Start a war in the middle of town? No, this is between them now. Our job is to keep civilians safe and handle whatever's left in the morning. He paused, remembering the look in Samuel's eyes earlier. Besides, if half the stories about Creek are true, we'd just be getting in his way. In his bedroom window, Bobby Parker knelt with his face pressed against the glass, defying his parents' orders to sleep. He had read every dime novel he could find about the Old West, but this was real. A genuine legend was about to face down the bad guys just like in the stories. Only this didn't feel exciting like in the books. This felt dangerous and sad, like watching an approaching storm that you knew would change everything it touched. Betty Johnson sat in her darkened saloon, a loaded shotgun across her lap. She had refused to go home, positioning herself where she could see both Samuel's house and the room where Cole and his men plotted. Years of running a saloon had taught her to read men's intentions, and everything about tonight felt like a powder keg looking for a spark. The first move came just past 1 o'clock. 3 shadows detached themselves from the darkness behind the saloon, moving with exaggerated care through the quiet streets. They split up at the crossroads, 2 heading down the back alley behind Samuel's house, 1 moving toward the front. In his chair, Samuel watched their approach through his arranged mirrors. His breathing remained steady, his hands still. He had been in this position more times than he could count, though never with quite so many years weighing on his shoulders. Age had slowed him, he knew that, but it had also taught him patience. The young gun who had earned the name Hawkeye might have rushed out to meet them. The old man he had become knew the value of waiting. Cole carried a small barrel of kerosene stolen from behind the general store. Jake and Danny each held bundles of oil-soaked rags. Their plan was simple: surround the house, start fires at the corners, and wait for the old man to either burn or run. They hadn't counted on the mirrors, hadn't noticed the carefully positioned water buckets, hadn't realized that every approach to the house had been mapped out years ago by a man who had spent his life planning for moments exactly like this. The night air carried the first hint of kerosene smell. Through his mirrors, Samuel watched Cole's shape move past the front window, saw Jake's shadow in the back, and caught the nervous shuffle of Danny's feet at the side of the house. His right hand moved slightly, adjusting his grip on the Colt. "Last chance, boys," he said softly, though they couldn't hear him. "Walk away now or learn why they used to call me Hawkeye." The first match flared in the darkness, its small light reflecting off a dozen hidden mirrors, creating a constellation of tiny stars around the house. The time for waiting was over. Whatever happened next would become part of Cactus Ridge's history, assuming anyone was left to tell the tale. The match arced through the night air, trailing orange light like a falling star. Before it could touch the kerosene-soaked wood of Samuel's porch, a single shot rang out. The match disappeared, struck in mid-flight, leaving only a trace of smoke and the sharp smell of phosphorus in the air. "That's one," Samuel's voice carried clearly in the night air. "I've got 11 more in these guns. Who wants the second?" Cole froze, the empty matchbox falling from his suddenly numb fingers. He had heard stories of shots like that, impossible shots that defied explanation, but hearing stories was different from seeing a match shot out of the air in the dark. "Spread out," Cole hissed to his companions. "He can't watch all sides at once." But Samuel's voice came again, calm as a morning breeze. "Danny's behind the water barrel to the east. Jake's crouching by Betty's rosebush to the west. And you, Cole, you're standing exactly 17 steps from my front door, thinking about that second match in your vest pocket." In his hiding spot, Danny's breath caught. He hadn't moved a muscle, hadn't made a sound, but somehow the old man knew exactly where he was. Stories of Hawkeye Creek's legendary perception began to seem less like tall tales and more like warnings they should have heeded. 15 years is a long time to carry hate, Cole, Samuel continued, still unseen in the darkness of his house. Your brother made his choice when he rode with the Clayton gang, just like you're making yours now. Cole's face contorted with rage. You don't get to talk about my brother. You don't get to hide in there and pretend you're still the man you were. He pulled his revolver, firing 3 quick shots through the front window. The sound of breaking glass hadn't even faded when 2 shots answered. Not from the window, but from somewhere else entirely. Cole's gun went spinning into the dirt, his hand numbed by the precision shot that had struck the weapon itself. At the same moment, Danny yelped as his own gun was shot cleanly from his grasp. That's 4, Samuel counted calmly. 8 left. Want to try for the rest of your weapons, or should we have a real conversation? Jake, panicking, broke from his cover and ran for the street, firing wildly at the house. His first shot went wide, his second splintered a porch post, and his third never came. Samuel's response was swift, 3 more shots in rapid succession. The first knocked Jake's gun away, the second cut his gun belt clean off, and the third splintered the boardwalk at his feet, stopping him in his tracks. 7 left, Samuel announced, though I should mention I've got 2 more fully loaded guns within reach. Numbers were never really your strong suit, were they, Cole? Cole scrambled behind a water trough, reaching for a hidden backup gun tucked in his boot. He never even got close. Samuel's final shot knocked the hidden gun away before Cole's fingers could close around it, the bullet striking with such precision that it left Cole's hand unharmed, but his sleeve pinned to the ground. As Sheriff Palmer and his deputy finally approached, drawn by the gunfire, Samuel holstered his weapons. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 minutes, and not a single person had died. Every shot had been placed with the precision of a surgeon, designed to disarm and disable rather than kill. Young Bobby Parker, watching from his window, had counted every shot. He had just witnessed something he had only read about in dime novels, the kind of shooting that turned men into legends. But what impressed him most wasn't the accuracy of the shots, but the restraint behind them. Hawkeye Creek hadn't just shown them how well he could shoot. He had shown them why he had earned the right to stop. The sunrise that painted Cactus Ridge in shades of gold seemed to mock the tension still hanging in the air. Sheriff Palmer's men led Cole Henderson and Danny Williams to the jail, their procession watched by townspeople who had emerged from their homes like prairie dogs after a storm. But this storm, they would soon learn, was just the beginning. Betty Johnson stood in her saloon doorway watching telegraph operator Charlie Watson running from person to person, sharing the morning's incoming messages. The night's events weren't staying quiet. They were spreading across the territory faster than a prairie fire. Samuel Creek sat in his usual rocking chair, but his eyes weren't closed in their customary morning rest. Instead, they scanned the horizon with the sharp attention of a man who knew that fame attracted trouble like honey attracted bears. His hands had their familiar tremor, but now and then they would steady completely, especially when his gaze caught movement at the edge of town. 3 telegrams already this morning, Sheriff Palmer said, climbing the steps to Samuel's porch. 2 from newspapermen in Santa Fe, and 1 from the territorial marshal's office. He paused, watching Samuel's reaction. Word's getting out about how the legendary Hawkeye Creek disarmed 3 men with 11 perfect shots in the dark. 12 shots, Samuel corrected quietly. The last one still in my gun. Sometimes the shots you don't take matter more than the ones you do. Before Palmer could respond, young Bobby Parker came running up, clutching a handful of spent cartridge cases he had collected from the previous night. His eyes shone with excitement, but there was something else there too, a hunger for knowledge that Samuel recognized all too well. "Mr. Creek," Bobby started, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Three riders appeared at the edge of town, their intentions clear in the way they carried themselves. Gun hands looking to make names for themselves, the first vultures drawn by the scent of legend. "Bobby," Samuel said softly, "run tell your mother you'll be late for supper. Then go to Betty's and help her close up the saloon." His eyes never left the approaching riders, and his hands had gone completely steady. In the jail, Danny Williams pressed against the bars, watching the scene unfold through the window. Unlike Cole, who sat in sullen silence, Danny's mind was racing. He had seen something last night that changed him. Not just the shooting, but the mercy behind it. Every shot designed to disarm, not destroy. It was a revelation that made him question everything he thought he knew about strength. "Sheriff," he called out as Palmer returned to the jail, "I want to make a deal." Meanwhile, Betty Johnson was doing more than just closing her saloon. She was writing rapidly in a leather-bound journal, recording everything she had witnessed. She had been keeping chronicles of Cactus Ridge for 15 years, but never had she felt more like a historian than now. Something was changing in their quiet town, and she meant to document every detail. The three riders split up as they entered the town proper, taking positions that wouldn't have meant anything to most observers. But Samuel saw it all, the way they placed themselves to cover each other's blind spots, the practiced ease with which they kept their shooting hands free. These weren't common troublemakers, these were professionals. "Might want to clear the street," Samuel called out, his voice carrying easily in the morning air. A few townspeople were still watching from doorways and windows. "Some folks are about to make poor decisions." The lead rider, a man in a black duster with silver conchos down the sleeves, reined his horse to a stop in the center of the street. "You Creek?" he called out. "Hawkeye Creek?" "Depends," Samuel replied, not moving from his chair. "If you're looking for the legend, he died a long time ago. If you're looking for trouble, you might want to reconsider. Had my fill of that last night." "Name's Carson Malone," the writer announced. "Made quite a reputation myself down in Mexico. Thought I'd come see if the stories about you were true." His hand hovered near his gun. "They say you can shoot a playing card edge-on at 50 paces. "They say a lot of things," Samuel responded. "Most of them are best left in the past." But even as he spoke, a telegraph operator was receiving another message. This one from a name that made his face go pale. He rushed out of his office, the paper clutched in his trembling hand, looking for the sheriff. The message was brief but carried the weight of history. Confirmed sighting Hawkeye Creek. Stop. Victor Deadeye McGrath released from Yuma Prison 3 days ago. Stop. Swore revenge. Stop. Heading your way. Stop. The morning sun continued to climb, casting shorter shadows across Cactus Ridge. But longer shadows were gathering, shadows of the past, of reputation, of choices made and prices yet to be paid. The legend of Hawkeye Creek wasn't ending. It was being reborn. And with it would come both glory and grief, redemption and revenge. Carson Malone's reputation wasn't just talk. 3 notches on his gun had been earned in a single afternoon in Nogales, and his speed was whispered about in saloons from El Paso to Tombstone. But as he faced Samuel Creek across the sun-baked street of Cactus Ridge, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Doubt. "Last chance to walk away, son," Samuel said, still seated in his rocking chair. "There's no glory in challenging an old man, and no wisdom in pushing one who doesn't want to fight." Malone's 2 companions had taken positions at opposite ends of the street. The one in the brown vest was named Tucker Reed, known for his trick shots in Kansas City. The other, a lean man with a scarred face who called himself simply the Priest, had a warrant out for him in 3 territories. Inside the jail, Danny Williams pressed against the bars. "Sheriff, you've got to let me talk to them. I know Tucker Reed, ran with him once. Maybe I can stop this before it starts." Palmer studied the young man thoughtfully. The change in Danny since last night was remarkable, as if seeing true skill and mercy combined had awakened something in him. "Start talking," Palmer said. Meanwhile, Betty Johnson had ushered Bobby Parker into her saloon, but the boy wouldn't move away from the window. "Miss Betty," he whispered, "look at Mr. Creek's hands. They're not shaking anymore." Indeed, Samuel's hands were steady as stone as he slowly rose from his chair. His movements had none of the hesitation or trembling that the town had grown used to seeing. Each step down from his porch was measured and precise. "Tell me something, Mr. Malone," Samuel called out. "Those 3 notches on your gun, were any of them earned face to face, or did you shoot them all in the back like you're planning to do here?" Malone's face flushed red. His companions shifted uneasily. They hadn't told anyone about their plan to take positions for a crossfire, yet somehow the old man knew. "Been watching you since you split up at the edge of town," Samuel continued. "Reed's got his rifle hidden under that blanket, thinking he'll get a shot from the livery roof. Your friend in black's been checking his Derringer every 30 seconds, nervous about it misfiring like it did in Prescott last month." He paused, letting his words sink in. A man who spends his life watching for trouble gets good at seeing the signs. In the jail, Danny's voice was urgent. "Sheriff, Reed's got a hair trigger on that rifle. He gets nervous. He's likely to shoot even if Malone calls it off. Let me help, please." Palmer made a decision. He quickly unlocked Danny's cell. "One wrong move," he warned, "and you'll wish you'd stayed behind bars." Outside, Malone's composure was cracking. Everything about this was wrong. The old man shouldn't know all these details, shouldn't be so calm, shouldn't be making him feel like a child being lectured. "Enough talk," Malone snarled, his right hand twitching near his gun. "Son," Samuel said softly, "your tell is in your left boot. It shifts just before you draw. Might want to work on that if you live through this morning's foolishness." The words had barely left his mouth when Malone went for his gun. His draw was fast, blindingly fast to most men's eyes, but Samuel's hands moved with the liquid grace of decades of experience. 2 shots rang out almost as one. Malone's gun went spinning away, knocked cleanly from his grip. He stared in disbelief at his unharmed hand, then at his weapon lying in the dust 6 feet away. The priest, seeing his leader disarmed, made his move. His Derringer appeared in his hand and promptly fell apart. Its main pin shot out with surgical precision. He hadn't even seen Samuel's second shot. On the livery roof, Reed was lining up his rifle shot when a familiar voice called out, "Tucker, don't do it!" Danny Williams stood in the street, hands raised. "This isn't some ranch hand you're drawing on. This is Hawkeye Creek. He's already got you dead to rights." Reed's finger tightened on the trigger, then relaxed as he processed Danny's words. He knew Danny, trusted him. "How dead?" he called back. "Look at your rifle sight," Samuel answered. Reed did, and his blood ran cold. The front sight of his rifle had been shot clean off with precision that he hadn't even felt the weapon jump in his hands. A shot like that in the bright morning sun, at that angle, through that distance. It shouldn't have been possible. "That's 3 shots you didn't hear," Samuel announced, "because I fired them while you were all watching Malone's gun hit the dirt. Now we can end this here with wounded pride and valuable lessons, or we can see what other impossible shots an old man can make before breakfast." Malone slowly raised his hands. They said you were something special, but this..." He shook his head. "This is something else." "No," Samuel corrected. "This is what happens when a man spends 50 years learning how to stop trouble without taking lives. Fancy shooting, that's just a tool. The real skill is in knowing how to use it right." As the would-be challengers gathered their damaged weapons and wounded pride, Danny Williams felt Sheriff Palmer's hand on his shoulder. "That was good work, son. Quick thinking." "Just trying to stop more blood from spilling," Danny replied. "Seems I learned something last night after all." But even as the morning's excitement died down, more riders were appearing on the horizon. News of Hawkeye Creek's return to action was spreading, and with it came every gunslinger looking to make a name for himself. And somewhere in a camp 3 days' ride away, Victor Deadeye McGrath was cleaning his custom-made revolvers, his thoughts focused on the man who had put him in Yuma prison 15 years ago, the man who had shot him in both hands, ending his reign of terror but leaving him alive. A mercy that McGrath had spent every day since then cursing. The afternoon sun beat down on Cactus Ridge as Danny Williams stood in Sheriff Palmer's office, his former cell door standing open behind him. After helping defuse the morning's confrontation, he had earned a measure of trust, but the real test was yet to come. "I want to make things right," Danny said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Mr. Creek showed me something yesterday, showed all of us something. There's a better way than violence." Palmer leaned back in his chair, studying the young man. Fine words, but Cole Henderson's still sitting in that cell, probably planning revenge. Why should I believe you're any different? Before Danny could answer, Samuel Creek stepped into the office, his boots dusty from his morning walk. "Because he stepped into the street to save a life today," Samuel said. "Takes more courage to stop a bullet than to fire one." The old gunslinger's presence seemed to fill the small office. Even Palmer found himself sitting straighter. In the light streaming through the window, they could see the silver threading through Samuel's hair, but also the sharp alertness in his eyes that never seemed to fade. "Sir," Danny began, then stopped, gathering his thoughts. "The way you handled those shots last night, every bullet placed to disarm, not destroy. I've never seen anything like it, never even thought it was possible." "Possible isn't the same as easy," Samuel replied. "Takes years of practice to shoot well enough to avoid killing. Takes even longer to learn when not to shoot at all." He paused, studying Danny's face. "But you're young enough to learn, if you're willing to put in the work." Outside, young Bobby Parker was sweeping Betty's saloon porch, trying to stay close to where the action was. He had appointed himself unofficial watchman, keeping an eye out for more trouble riding into town. The morning's excitement had drawn quite a crowd, and Betty's place was doing good business despite the early hour. "3 more just rode in," Bobby called out, his voice carrying through the sheriff's office window. "Look like cowhands, but they're riding war saddles." Samuel's hand steadied immediately, but he didn't move. Instead, he turned to Danny. "Tell me what you see in them, son. Look close, like I taught you this morning." Danny moved to the window, trying to see what Samuel saw. "The one in front. His gun's too new, probably bought it special for this trip. The tall one's favoring his right leg, old injury maybe. And the third—" He squinted. "The third keeps looking at the telegraph office instead of us." "Good eye," Samuel nodded. "They're not here for trouble, they're here for information. Probably working for someone else. The question is who?" Palmer joined them at the window. "McGrath?" he asked quietly. "Maybe," Samuel replied. "Victor always did like to know what he was riding into. Used to send men ahead to scout his targets back before I put him in Yuma." The name sent a chill through the office. Victor Deadeye McGrath wasn't just another gunslinger. He was a legend in his own right, though a darker one than Samuel. Where Samuel had used his skills to protect, McGrath had used his to terrorize. Their final confrontation 15 years ago had become the stuff of legend. "Tell me about him," Danny said. "If he's coming, I want to help. I need to help." Samuel settled into a chair, his movements deliberate. Victor McGrath was the kind of man who gave gunslingers a bad name. Didn't just kill, he enjoyed it. Liked to make examples of people. Town marshal in Tucson. Family man, good at his job. Then something broke in him. Started using his badge as an excuse for murder. Betty Johnson appeared in the doorway carrying a pot of coffee. She had heard enough to know this was a story that needed telling. As she poured cups for everyone, Samuel continued. "I was called in after he had killed 3 families, claiming they were harboring criminals. No proof, no trials, just graves. When I caught up to him, he tried to shoot a young girl to distract me. That's when I put bullets through both his hands. Not to kill him, but to make sure he'd never hold a gun again. But he learned anyway," Palmer added. "Taught himself to shoot all over again in prison. They say he spent 15 years practicing with makeshift weapons, training his mangled hands to hold a gun." Danny absorbed this information, his face grave. "And now he's coming here for revenge." "Not just revenge," Samuel corrected. "Vindication. He wants to prove that his way, the way of violence and death, is stronger than what I stand for. And he'll kill anyone he needs to in order to make that point." Bobby, who had crept closer to listen, spoke up from the doorway. But you'll stop him, won't you, Mr. Creek? Like you stopped Cole and the others? Samuel's face showed a sadness that hadn't been there before. It's not that simple, son. McGrath isn't like these young guns looking to make a name. He's had 15 years to plan this. 15 years of hatred to fuel him, and he's not coming alone. As if to emphasize his point, one of the newly arrived riders entered the telegraph office. Through the window, they could see him sending a message, no doubt reporting back to his employer about the morning's events. I want to learn, Danny said suddenly. Everything you can teach me. Not just about shooting, but about seeing things the way you do. About stopping trouble before it starts. Samuel studied him for a long moment. Learning to shoot like I do would take years. We might have days, maybe less. Then teach me what you can, Danny insisted. I've done wrong in my life, followed men like Cole without thinking. Let me try to make it right. Outside, the three riders mounted up and headed out of town, their real purpose accomplished. They had seen what they came to see, that Hawkeye Creek wasn't just a legend, but very much a living, breathing threat to their employer's plans. The afternoon stretched on, the shadow of impending confrontation growing longer with each passing hour. In his cell, Cole Henderson smiled, knowing that bigger storms were gathering. But in the sheriff's office, something else was taking shape. The beginning of redemption, the passing of knowledge, and the formation of allies for the battles to come. The next morning brought a cold wind from the north, unusual for the season. Betty Johnson found her wind chimes clattering with an ominous rhythm as she opened the saloon. The town had changed in just 2 days. Armed men walking the streets, visitors filling every room, and tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. At the edge of town, Samuel Creek was conducting an unusual lesson. Danny Williams stood facing a row of bottles on a fence, his gun hand steady but his frustration evident. For an hour, he had been trying to hit the bottles without breaking them, just nudging them off the fence the way Samuel had demonstrated. You're still trying to dominate the gun, Samuel said, watching Danny's stance. It's not about power, it's about precision. Control, balance, Danny finished. But my shots either miss completely or shatter the bottles. Because you're thinking like the man you were, not the man you're becoming. Samuel stepped forward, adjusting Danny's arm slightly. When I found my way, it wasn't about learning to shoot better. It was about learning to live better. The shooting followed naturally. Young Bobby Parker sat cross-legged nearby, watching intently. He had appointed himself Samuel's unofficial student as well, though he was too young for shooting lessons. Instead, Samuel had been teaching him to observe, to read people and situations the way a tracker reads signs. "Rider coming," Bobby announced suddenly, pointing east. "Moving fast, but trying not to show it." Samuel smiled approvingly. "Good eye. What else?" Bobby squinted. He's riding like he's scared. Keep looking behind him." The rider turned out to be a young ranch hand named Billy Torres. His horse was lathered, showing signs of hard riding, and his face carried news before his voice could deliver it. "Mr. Creek," he called out, reining in hard. "McGrath, he hit the Wilson Ranch yesterday. Old man Wilson, his wife. Everyone." The news hit like a physical blow. The Wilsons had been good people, their ranch a regular stop for travelers between towns. More importantly, they had been friends of Samuel's, offering him shelter when he had first arrived in the territory 5 years ago. "Tell me everything," Samuel said, his voice carrying a dangerous calm. "They're saying he lined them all up. Ranch hands, family, even the cook. Made them watch as he shot the bottles off the fence post behind them, showing off his accuracy, then—" Billy's voice cracked. "Then he made his point about what happens to people who help certain retired lawmen." Danny's face had gone pale. This was the reality of the man they were facing. Not just a killer, but a monster who enjoyed his work. The bottle shooting practice took on a darker meaning now. In town, Sheriff Palmer was organizing a posse, but Samuel knew it wouldn't help. McGrath was sending a message, marking his territory, drawing his prey out. A posse would just give him more targets. "Miss Betty," Bobby called out as they returned to town. "There's a man in black at the bar. Been watching the street all morning." Betty nodded slightly, indicating she knew. The stranger had arrived at dawn, ordered one beer, and nursed it while studying everyone who passed. His left hand was heavily scarred, the kind of scars that came from having your hands shot through and healing wrong. "One of McGrath's," Samuel said quietly. "Let him watch. He'll see what we want him to see." Throughout the day, more news trickled in. McGrath's band had grown, picking up hired guns and opportunists as it moved closer to Cactus Ridge. They had hit 2 more homesteads, not for killing this time, but for supplies and information. In his cell, Cole Henderson had grown unusually quiet, listening to the reports with increasing concern. Even he seemed to realize that McGrath's arrival would bring a violence that went beyond anything he had known. "Danny," Samuel said that afternoon as they continued their practice, "tomorrow we try something different. The gun's just a tool. The real weapon is up here." He tapped his temple. "McGrath thinks this is about shooting, about proving who's faster or more accurate. But it's really about choosing who we become." Danny nodded, understanding flowing through him like a river finding its course. The bottles on the fence weren't just targets. They were choices. Each one represented a moment where violence could be turned aside, where skill could preserve life instead of taking it. As the sun began to set, Bobby rushed up to Samuel's porch. "Mr. Creek, the stranger in black, he's leaving. But he left something on his table in Betty's saloon." They found a playing card on the table where the scarred man had sat all day. It was an ace of spades with a message written in precise handwriting. 3 days, for 15 years of darkness, for hands that never healed right, for a mercy that was worse than death. 3 days, then we settle things the old way. And this time, Hawkeye, you'll learn that mercy is just another word for weakness. VM. Samuel read the message twice, then quietly pocketed the card. "Betty, send word to the outlying farms. Anyone who wants to leave should go now. Danny, tomorrow we start real training. And Bobby?" He looked at the boy seriously. "Yes, sir. I need you to be my eyes in town. McGrath will send more watchers. We need to know who and where." The boy straightened with pride at the responsibility. "You can count on me, Mr. Creek." As night fell over Cactus Ridge, lights burned late in windows throughout the town. Some were frightened people making plans to leave. Others were determined folks preparing to stand their ground. But in every pool of lamplight, in every whispered conversation, one question hung in the air. Could even the legendary Hawkeye Creek stand against a man who had spent 15 years planning his revenge? The wind chimes at Betty's saloon continued their eerie song, counting down the hours until darkness would finally meet light in the streets of Cactus Ridge. Dawn painted Cactus Ridge in shades of blood red, the sun rising through dust-laden clouds that promised a storm. 2 days remained until McGrath's deadline, and the town had taken on the atmosphere of a fortress preparing for siege. Sheriff Palmer had deputized a dozen men, though everyone knew they wouldn't stand a chance against what was coming. "Watch their hands first," Samuel instructed, standing with Bobby Parker on the saloon's upper balcony. "Hands tell you everything. Tension, fear, intention. See that fellow by the water trough?" Bobby narrowed his eyes, focusing on a dusty traveler who had just ridden in. His right hand keeps touching his coat pocket, not his gun. "Good, what does that tell you?" "He's carrying something important, a message maybe." Samuel nodded approvingly. McGrath's scout probably has a report to deliver. Notice how he's pretending not to look this way, but his hat brim hasn't moved from this direction. Below them, Danny Williams was helping Betty Johnson board up her ground floor windows, leaving only narrow gaps. The young man had thrown himself into his new role with a dedication that surprised everyone except Samuel. His hands, once quick to violence, now moved with careful purpose. "Tell me what you see in Danny," Samuel said to Bobby, making every moment a lesson. Bobby watched the former outlaw work. "He's different now, calmer but not weak. Calm like some folks thought you were. Strong calm." "Strong calm," Samuel repeated thoughtfully. "That's a good way to put it. Strength isn't about yelling." "Riders coming," Bobby interrupted, pointing west. "No, 2 riders, 3 more coming." A group of mounted men appeared through the morning haze, but these weren't McGrath's men. Samuel recognized them immediately, lawmen from neighboring territories drawn by news of the coming confrontation. Leading them was Marshal John Cooper, a hard-faced man Samuel had known in his ranger days. "Should have known you'd show up, John," Samuel called down as the group dismounted. "Word's spreading," Cooper replied grimly. "McGrath's got nearly 30 riders now, picking up every piece of human trash between here and Yuma. Figure you could use some help." "Or you figured this was your chance to end McGrath once and for all," Samuel observed. Cooper's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "Maybe both. Either way, we're here." Inside the jail, Cole Henderson sat silently in his cell, listening to the increasing activity outside. His face showed conflicting emotions: anger at his situation, fear of what was coming, and something else, something that looked almost like regret. Danny approached the cell, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Brought you something hot. Weather's turning." Cole stared at his former lieutenant. "Are you really buying into all this? The old man's philosophy about mercy and precision? McGrath's going to kill everyone in this town just to prove a point." "Maybe," Danny replied. "Or maybe you're just scared of what it means if Mr. Creek is right. If there really is a better way than what we chose." The morning wore on, bringing more arrivals. Not all were welcome. Betty spotted 3 known gunmen taking rooms, their allegiance uncertain. Bobby, from his various observation posts, counted 12 potential threats by noon. Each one was noted, their positions marked on a map in the sheriff's office. "McGrath's not just sending scouts," Samuel explained to Danny during their afternoon practice. "He's positioning pieces on the board. Some of these men will join him when he arrives. Others are here to block escape routes to make sure his revenge is complete." Danny had finally managed to knock a bottle off the fence without breaking it. But why wait? Why give us time to prepare? "Because this isn't just about killing me," Samuel replied, his eyes scanning the street as they talked. "It's about destroying everything I stand for." He wants to prove that mercy is weakness, that his way of violence is the only way, and he wants witnesses. As if to emphasize his point, another group of writers appeared, journalists from as far as San Francisco, drawn by the promise of a legendary confrontation. Marshal Cooper's men turned them away at the town limits, but everyone knew they would find ways to watch what was coming. Bobby burst into the sheriff's office late that afternoon, his young face serious. Mr. Creek, one of McGrath's men, was asking Betty about Cole Henderson, asked if he was still in jail. Samuel's expression darkened. He headed to the jail, finding Danny already there, standing guard. Cole looked up as they entered, understanding dawning on his face. "He's going to try to break me out, isn't he? Use the chaos to free me, expect me to join his side?" "Would you?" Samuel asked directly. Cole was silent for a long moment. 2 days ago I would have. Now I've seen what real skill looks like. Real strength. McGrath's just a rabid dog with a grudge." The wind picked up as evening approached, carrying the smell of rain. Betty's wind chimes sang their warning song as dark clouds gathered over Cactus Ridge. In his room, Bobby carefully maintained his list of suspicious visitors, marking their locations with a child's determination. Danny practiced with his gun in the fading light, each shot more controlled than the last. And Samuel Creek sat on his porch, watching the gathering storm with eyes that saw more than most men could imagine. His hands were steady now, the tremor gone as if it had never existed. In 2 days, he would face not just a deadly enemy, but a philosophical opposite. A man who represented everything he had spent his life standing against. "Mr. Creek," Bobby called from across the street. "Wire just came in." McGrath hit another town, left a message written in... His voice trailed off. "It's all right, son. Say it." Written in blood on the saloon wall, 2 days until the Eagle Falls. The wind chimes chattered more urgently as the storm clouds thickened. Cactus Ridge held its breath, caught between the coming storm and the growing legend of its defender. But legends, as every man, woman, and child in town was about to learn, are written in blood as often as glory. The final morning dawned gray and cold, with thunder rolling in the distance. Cactus Ridge had never been so quiet. No children playing in the streets, no wagons moving goods, no morning gossip at Betty's saloon. Only armed men positioned at windows and doorways, watching the horizon. Bobby Parker's young voice broke the silence first. "Dust cloud to the east, big one." From his position on the saloon roof, Danny Williams raised a spyglass. The past 2 days of intense training under Samuel had changed him. His movements were measured now, his eyes constantly scanning like his mentor had taught him. "At least 30 riders," he reported. "McGrath's in front. Can't mistake those silver-plated guns." Samuel Creek stood on his porch, seemingly relaxed despite the approaching threat. His hands were steady as he adjusted his gun belt. Not the worn everyday leather he had used recently, but his old Ranger rig, restored to perfect condition. "Danny," he called out, "remember what we discussed. No heroics. Your job is to protect Betty's place and the people inside. Bobby, get to your post at the telegraph office. Keep that line to the marshal's office open." Marshal Cooper approached, his deputies spreading out behind him. "Last chance to do this differently, Samuel. We've got enough guns now to meet them head on." "And turn the whole town into a killing field." Samuel shook his head. "No, McGrath wants me. Everything else is just his attempt to prove a point about violence and mercy." A lone rider broke away from the approaching cloud, moving ahead of the main group. Even at a distance, the man's presence commanded attention. Victor McGrath had changed during his 15 years in Yuma prison. His once dark hair had gone steel gray, and his hands, even from a distance, showed the twisted evidence of old injuries. He reined his horse to a stop at the edge of town. "Come out, Hawkeye," his voice boomed across the empty street. "Come see what 15 years of practice can do." Samuel stepped off his porch, his boots raising small puffs of dust with each deliberate step. "I see prison didn't improve your manners, Victor." McGrath's laugh was harsh. "But it did improve my aim. Want to see?" His gun seemed to materialize in his mangled hand, and 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. 3 bottles on the saloon porch rail exploded. The same kind of trick shot Samuel had been teaching Danny, but done with brutal force rather than precision. "Still think mercy is strength, old man? Still think there's room for kindness in a world of lead and gunpowder?" "I think," Samuel replied calmly, "that you spent 15 years learning the wrong lesson." Behind McGrath, his riders began spreading out, taking positions around the town's perimeter. Among them were faces Danny recognized. Gunmen who had been filtering into town over the past 2 days, now showing their true allegiance. In the jail, Cole Henderson stood at his cell door, watching through the window. Sheriff Palmer had offered to free him, expecting trouble, but Cole had chosen to stay. "Some things," he had said, "you need to see through to the end." "Before we start this dance," McGrath called out, "I have a few points to make." He raised his gun again, aiming at the hotel's upper window where a woman was barely visible. "About the price of helping lawmen." The shot never came. Instead, McGrath's gun went spinning from his grip, knocked away by a shot so fast few had seen Samuel draw. But McGrath smiled, switching to his second gun with his other twisted hand. "Good, still fast. But are you fast enough to stop all of us?" As if on signal, several of McGrath's men raised their weapons, not at Samuel, but at various townspeople visible in windows and doorways. Betty Johnson, Danny, Marshal Cooper's men, and even young Bobby at his telegraph post became targets. "You see," McGrath continued, "this is the lesson about mercy I learned in prison. It's not just weakness, it's a chain. You care about these people, and that makes them weapons I can use against you." Thunder rolled closer as McGrath retrieved his fallen gun. "So here's how this ends. You and me will have our dance, but first I'm going to prove my point. Every person you ever showed mercy to, everyone you ever taught your precious lessons to, they'll learn that mercy gets you killed." Samuel's voice cut through the tension like a steel blade. "Danny, show them what you learned about mercy and strength." The rain began to fall as positions were taken, and the final confrontation began. But this wouldn't be the kind of gunfight McGrath expected. This would be a lesson in the true meaning of strength, one that would echo through the territory for generations to come. The first drops of rain struck the dusty street as McGrath's men took their positions. But something was different about this confrontation. Instead of the chaotic violence McGrath expected, there was an eerie calm, the kind that comes before a storm breaks. "You think your little speeches change anything?" McGrath snarled, wiping rain from his scarred face. You think teaching these sheep to shoot makes them wolves? I've spent 15 years learning to hate better than you ever learned to love. Samuel's voice carried clearly despite the growing storm. That's where you're wrong, Victor. While you were learning to hate, I was learning something else entirely. McGrath raised his gun, but before he could fire, something impossible happened. Danny Williams, from his position on the saloon roof, called out a warning about flanking riders, but his voice was joined by others. Bobby from the telegraph office, Betty from her saloon, even Cole Henderson from his jail cell window. The entire town had become Samuel's eyes and ears. Now, Samuel said quietly, what followed wasn't a gunfight. It was a symphony of precision. McGrath's men opened fire, but instead of the massacre they expected, they faced something they had never encountered. Every shot from the defenders was aimed not to kill, but to disarm. Guns were knocked from hands, gun belts were severed, horses were spooked but not harmed. McGrath watched in growing disbelief as his carefully planned attack fell apart. His men weren't being killed. They were being systematically disarmed by shooting so precise it seemed impossible. How? He whispered, then louder. How are you doing this? Because, Samuel replied, his own guns now drawn, I didn't just teach them to shoot. I taught them to choose. Every person in this town learned what you never could. That true strength isn't about taking life, it's about preserving it. Danny's voice rang out from the rooftop. Mr. Creek, McGrath's pulling a hideout gun. But Samuel was already moving. As McGrath drew a hidden derringer, aiming not at Samuel but at young Bobby in the telegraph office, 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Samuel's bullet struck McGrath's gun. Danny's shot, fired from the roof, caught the derringer's bullet in midair, a shot so impossible it would be talked about for decades. And the third shot came from Cole Henderson, who had somehow acquired a rifle in his cell, his bullet creating a shower of sparks as it collided with the other 2. McGrath stared at his empty, stinging hand, then at the crowd of townspeople emerging from their hiding places. Not one of his men had been killed, but all were disarmed. His grand plan for revenge had been turned into a demonstration of the very mercy he had spent 15 years despising. Finish it, McGrath whispered, falling to his knees in the muddy street. Prove I was right about mercy being weakness. Samuel holstered his guns and walked over to the broken man. No, Victor. I'm going to show you one last time what real strength is. He turned his back on McGrath and walked away. For a moment, McGrath's hand moved toward a gun lying in the mud. But something in the silence, something in the eyes of every person watching, made him stop. For the first time in 15 years, he saw clearly what Samuel had been trying to teach him all along. As the sun broke through the clouds, McGrath was led away by Marshal Cooper's men. Danny climbed down from his position, and Bobby emerged from the telegraph office. Betty Johnson stood in her doorway, a proud smile on her face. Mr. Creek, Bobby called out, running up to his mentor. That bullet catch? Will you teach me that too? Samuel smiled, ruffling the boy's wet hair. Someday, Bobby, but first you need to learn what that catch really meant. It wasn't about stopping the bullet. It was about having the strength to face darkness without becoming dark yourself. As the town began to stir back to life, Cole Henderson called out from his cell window. Hey, Creek, that offer to learn? Does it still stand for old fools who learned their lesson late? It stands for anyone willing to learn, Samuel replied. That's what I've been trying to teach all along. It's never too late to choose a better way. The legend of Hawkeye Creek didn't end that day in Cactus Ridge. Instead, it transformed into something greater, a story not just about a man's skill with a gun, but about the power of mercy to change lives. His legacy lived on through Danny, through Bobby, through every person who learned that true strength lies not in the ability to take life, but in the wisdom to preserve it. And if you pass through Cactus Ridge in the years that followed, you might see an old man teaching young gunslingers a different way, not just how to shoot straight, but how to live right. Some say his hands still trembled, except when he was showing mercy to those who least deserved it. And in that tremor was the greatest lesson of all, that the hardest battles we face are not against others, but against the darkness within ourselves.